and the borders might be more important than the political sociology. Also, Syria was a territory for conspiracy theories. We've seen it more in other cases than in other cases, maybe because of its geography or political geography. It reflected lots of divisions, not only in Syria or the region, but internationally as well, in the two sides of the political map, whether on the right or on the left. So it was a real laboratory in that sense. And after 12 years, we can start examining some dynamics that happen through the development of the conflict or of the revolution at the beginning, then the war, then the series of military interventions, as we will see. And the ending result is today a fragmented country, a destroyed country. We have records in terms of victims, in terms of displaced, internally displaced populations, but also in terms of refugees. When we were talking or discussing the topic, I thought of impunity, because I think impunity has been and continues to be one of the most important and dangerous questions in the whole Middle East. Maybe it is also an international question, but in the Middle East specifically, you do have a number of UN resolutions, a number of agreements. You have many, many things that were never respected, and none of those who do not respect them ever paid the price of that. So in a way, this culture of impunity also allows criminality to develop, because those who commit crimes consider they can always escape after a certain period of time, because they're protected by some superpowers, because there are members in the Security Council backing them. And the Middle East is the area where you have the highest numbers of vetoes, in fact. The United States used the veto 54 times in relation to the Israeli question. Russia used it in those 12 years 14 times. China used it 13 times. So you have a concentration as well of what we call this vetocracy in international relation, where we can sometimes not impose things, but we can definitely make things impossible to evolve or to happen, which allows impunity to continue, to impose itself, and to modify lives of people and of societies, and to contribute in a way to what we might consider or call nihilism, this rejection or this anger, this frustration against the whole world, since this whole world abandoned us or is not seeing us as equals, or as if we are excluded from the international community, and the international law was not designed to include us, to protect us like it should protect other peoples. So what I will try to do is first to go through the phases of this Syrian struggle, or of the Syrian revolution and war. What changed in 6 summers? It happened that these developments always took place in summers, and we'll see how each summer the configuration, the physiognomy of the conflict was changing and evolving, and other actors were projecting themselves into the Syrian scene. Then we'll talk about some of what I just mentioned in the introduction when it comes to what did Syria reveal to us throughout the years. So for the chronology of events in Syria, once again, as you all know, in March 2011, many revolutions were already taking place. The whole movement started in Tunisia, then we had Egypt, we had Libya, Yemen, Bahrain, and then Syria surprised most people, because no one was expecting, in a country where you already have a regime that is not into just, let's say, symbolic violence after imposing itself for years, or just using the police, like in the case of Tunisia, to control the society, or the army in the case of Egypt, leaving also some margin, let's say, of freedoms for some parties, as long as they do not threaten the regime itself and the military, or as in Yemen, due to the tribal structure, the political structure, some parties, the north, the south, there were some, let's say, spaces where political activism can express itself until it threatens the existing regime. Then there will be definitely violent repression. In the case of Syria, we were already into permanent violence. It's a state of violence. This happened in the 70s, it happened in Hama in 82, and it was a kind of a lesson to the Syrian people in the sense that what you will expect if you think of rebelling against the regime, if you think of challenging, of defying the regime, is what will happen, what happened to Hama and what will happen to you. Hama 82 is a trauma in Syria because that city was in 3 weeks massacred, bombed, thousands of people died, thousands disappeared, and maybe the Syrians thought in 2011 that this was possible because no one documented what happened, because no one covered what happened. There were no images. Victims were invisible. This whole orchestrated crime against the city happened without witnesses. So maybe in 2011, because of the mobile phones, because of the daily coverage, because of videos, because of documentation, because of media, the world will not allow Hama to be reproduced once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, as things will happen later. So Hama was a trauma, and many people after Hama thought that it will take long, long time before the Syrians will try to challenge the regime again. And before Hama there was Palmyr or Tadmor, the famous prison in Syria where torture was an industry and where also hundreds of people died under torture. And you have many, in fact, events throughout the Syrian modern history under Assad's father from 1970 to 2000, and then Assad's son 2000 until today, 2023. So we're talking about 53 years of the Assad. And in 2011, it was already 41 years of the Assad. It was a surprise for many observers to see that demonstrations are taking place. But of course, in these kind of situations and with the regime that already saw what happened in Tunisia and Egypt, immediately the brutal violent repression will start and will target demonstrators, and soon the country will go into an armed struggle where either soldiers from the army left the troops, or young men took the weapons to defend themselves, to protect demonstrations. So an armed struggle went in parallel with the demonstrations until 2012. So the first shift or the first change was the militarization of the revolution as of August 2011, after a series of defections in the army leading to the creation in June 2011 of the Free Syrian Army. The second crucial development was in 2012, in the summer as well, when the Assad regime used for the first time its air force, bombed areas that went out of its control, used the ballistic missiles, Scud missiles, sending them from southern Syria to the north. And also in 2012, we have the Iranian involvement in support of the regime that became clear. It was at the beginning, maybe in the first year, technical advisors, political advisors. Now we have more and more Iranian officers in Syria. And in that same summer, 2012, the first funeral of a Hezbollah fighter happened in Lebanon, showing that Hezbollah is involved based on Iranian demands in the Syrian war that is now more and more a war. This is an intervention that is clear now, the Iranian and the allies of Iran. But this is also the summer when the first elements of what we can call jihadism appeared in Syria. And let me just, in few words, distinguish between what we will call, and we will use that term later, jihadism, and what is kind of classical political Islam that already existed in Syria. The Muslim Brotherhood are a powerful group in Syria. Some other Salafi groups also were present. What I mean by jihadists are not only those who are not Syrians or coming from outside Syria, either from Iraq or through the Turkish borders, coming from Europe or sometimes from North Africa or from other places with this idea of a jihad in Syria. What we mean by them is that they are not usually concerned with the territoriality of the conflict or with the political temporality of the conflict. They go whatever the conditions of jihad according to the fatwa that they receive, whenever those conditions are gathered or they can prove them or find them or justify them. So they consider Syria a land of jihad, after considering Iraq a land of jihad, after being, or some of them at least, or previous generation, considering Afghanistan a land of jihad. Then Libya became a land of jihad. Then Mali. So they are not into the territoriality or the temporality of a political cause. They started arriving in Syria, pretending that they are going to build an Islamic model. They will fight the enemies of Islam in Syria. And the early elements, or let's say those who arrived first in 2012, either came from Iraq, where they were already fighting the Americans and the pro-American and pro-Iranian government in Baghdad, or probably the Turkish services allowed them to enter Syria because they thought they can instrumentalize them against the Kurds. You know that Turkey, immediately after the revolution, had the Turkish obsession, if we can call it like that, is the Kurdish issue. So to keep an eye on the Kurds and to have a powerful group also that might fight them if they will expand in their territorial control. So a series of events in 2012 that will definitely modify the whole situation. And in summer 2013, a turning point with the chemical weapon after a very sad statement made by Obama. Until now, no one knows if he was advised, and he said it after getting the advice of people around him, or it was just a statement made following a question by a journalist, what is the red line in Syria? That was the question. We have already thousands of people killed, tens of thousands wounded, many who disappeared. Already stories about torture in jail are everywhere. Rape is being used as a political instrument. We have displacement. Refugees are arriving in Turkey, in Jordan, and in Lebanon, neighboring countries. And Obama was asked, what is the red line? He said the only red line is chemical weapon, meaning that the regime should not use the chemical weapon. Okay? Now, of course, we can interpret later how it was understood by Assad. As long as you say there is only one red line, that is chemical weapon, it means you can keep killing people without chemical weapon. Except that, and this is related to impunity, Assad wanted to show to the Syrians, his social bases, or those who support him, and those who are opposed to him, that even that red line, he can cross it and nothing will happen. And probably he was advised on that by Russians. There are already some debates about it, whether the Iranians wanted it or not. The Russians said, we will test the American will, especially that Obama was at the same time negotiating the nuclear deal with Iran, and people around him were saying, we cannot negotiate with Iran and then fight them in Syria. Others would add to this that after the Libyan disaster, as it was called in the American administration, following the UN resolution and the intervention against Gaddafi, the Americans didn't want to intervene again in the region. He was promising he will withdraw from Iraq, and he withdrew in 2011 massively from Iraq. The American public opinion was opposed to any involvement. We can talk about lots of considerations and factors that are, and parameters that are, yes, legitimate. They can be discussed. But that statement about the red lines was very strange in its timing. And Assad tested it first in Jobar, which is a neighborhood very close to Damascus, where it was used against fighters the first time. And French journalists brought samples from the hair and from the sand to prove it. That was what the laboratories wanted. And there was a proof that the sarin gas was used for the first time. Before it, they used few substances in Homs, where the Red Cross said that some of the people who were burned, they couldn't deal with their injuries. Was it chemical, not chemical? There was a debate about it. But in May 2013, clearly it was used in small doses in Jobar, before the 21st of August, when a massive attack in the sarin gas targeted the two Ghouta of Damascus, the two large neighborhoods not far from the capital, where more than 1,400 people died in few hours during that attack. So here it was clear that the red line was crossed on purpose to test the US will, or the Western will, during a moment of tension with Russia. Russia that is supporting the regime for different reasons, but is not yet involved directly. And what happened after it? The red line was crossed. Nothing. In fact, once again, there will be a statement by Kerry, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, in which he said, following a meeting with Lavrov, that if the Syrian regime accepts to destroy or to abandon its stock of chemical weapons, to give it to a UN inspection mission, we're fine with that. So it appeared as if, once again, if I kill someone and then I give you the gun, I'm fine. These kind of messages are extremely dangerous when it comes to impunity, because the regime and the Russians understood through that offer that there is no will in the US to go into an intervention against Assad following crossing the red line. They knew that they cannot go to the UN. Of course, there will be a Russian veto. But in the American Constitution, the president, as long as the military operation would not require deployment on the ground, as long as it is less than 60, I think, days, the president can order a military operation, which did not happen. In Britain, also, they voted in the parliament against it. In France, they were very hesitant about it. And then finally, the agreement was a UN resolution that will impose on the regime to abandon its chemical program, and the stocks should be gathered by a UN inspection mission, and negotiations started about that. But the regime did prove to its social basis, as well as to the Syrians and to those who are fighting him, that I can even use chemical weapons, I can even cross the only red line that was set, and nothing would happen. And that was a game changer in the case of Syria, because it's not a coincidence that following August 2013, Daesh or ISIS will start its rise. At the time, we are still in a moment where Al-Qaeda of Iraq is itself in Syria. Nusra is part of it, but not very happy with it. So you have within the jihadist map rivalries and different interpretations of who should take the lead. Baghdadi is still in Iraq. And after 2013, with a certain consensus maybe among the Syrians that no one is going to intervene to save them from Assad, this is the beginning of the rise of the two nihilist groups, of the two jihadist groups, Nusra and ISIS. It was not yet called, in fact, ISIS is not always the exact translation because it's the Levant or the Sham at the end. But this is a crucial moment in that sense, and this is also the beginning of the massive departure from Syria. Hundreds of thousands of Syrians reached Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon, because once again they felt totally abandoned and vulnerable, and no one is going to intervene, whatever would happen and whatever kind of weapons would be used against them. And this is the fourth summer, the summer 2014. Baghdadi declares officially that he's now the caliphate and the caliph, and the caliphate is there between parts of Iraq and Syria. He's fighting mainly other jihadists, but also Islamist Syrian groups, because the expansion of ISIS throughout the Syrian territory did not clash with the Syrian regime. They took over Deir Zur, then they took over Raqqa, all of the east of Syria that was already under the control of the Syrian opposition. So the expansion of Daesh weakened and fragilized the Syrian opposition before clashing with the regime. And definitely the regime and the Iranians who were setting the strategy were not unhappy with it, because now also the formula and the equation that Assad kept using in its propaganda, that against me we only have jihadists, we only have Al-Qaeda, we only have Islamists who want to overthrow a secular progressive regime. All of that now, for Assad, it's a kind of a prophecy that his propaganda used, and now he's not far from realizing it and talking more and more about it, which is, again, something that will change lots of approaches towards the Syrian situation. US intervention against ISIS, exclusively against ISIS, started following that rise, because they killed American and I think a British as well, humanitarian aid workers in Syria. So Obama declared war on ISIS, and this is the beginning of the US